Over 17,000 years ago, humans first painted on the walls of caves. They painted images of animals, horses, bison, and birds. The human-animal bond goes back a long way. Studies suggest that humans domesticated dogs about 15,000 years ago and pigs about 9,000 years ago. So how do we see this relationship today? We have a panel of experts, people who really know their animals. I'm Dave Russell, and this is Our Ohio.
This program is made possible thanks to the generous support from the Ohio Farm Bureau members, producing our food, growing our economy, and making communities stronger. The Ohio Farm Bureau, forging a partnership between farmers and consumers. And by
Nationwide's family of companies has a variety of products to protect your family, with our promise to be there when you need us, from city to farm. Nationwide is on your side.
Funding for Our Ohio is also made possible by the generous support from Turner Farm, a working organic farm and education center in Indian Hill, Ohio. And by your membership support to this public television station. Thank you.
We talked 45 minutes.
I don't go.
I didn't realize it.
Unless I
Really?
get tickets.
Yeah.
Too crowded.
Hi, this is Our Ohio. I'm Dave Russell. Joining us today is Dr. Kathryn Proudfoot, an assistant professor at the Ohio State University College of Veterinary Medicine, and Harold Dates, president and CEO of the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, Cincinnati, and Charles Wildman, a pork producer from southwestern Ohio and a leader in state and national industry associations. Welcome, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let's talk about this human-animal bond. Each of you, in your lives, in your livelihood, your professions, you're all intimately tied to animals. When it comes to animal welfare, it means different things to different people. How does a veterinarian look at animal welfare?
How do I, or how does a veterinarian? Those are two different things.
How does Katie? Let's start with how does Katie?
So, as a scientist, it's my job to try to define animal welfare in a way that's representative of society as best that I can. So I look at people like veterinarians where they do think about more than just health, but generally health and productivity are two of the main things that they'll look for. Their job is to improve lives through improving health. Other people would have different concerns over the quality of life of animals, like being able to perform some natural behaviors, or on the other side, looking at more of the mental health of the animal, not just the physical health. If they might be not sick, not ill, but they might not be feeling well. So is there ways that we can measure all three of those things? And what's really important is to not focus on just one and compromise the others. Because when you do that, then it ends up being rather unsustainable, because then some of the other concerns will creep up again eventually. So you'll have to come at the problem all over again. So it's really important to try to balance those different perspectives.
Harry, what about you? How do you define animal welfare?
Well, it used to be well-being, but now it's more encompassing than that. As we've talked a little bit about the animal's behavior, how comfortable the animal is. Animals should not live in fear or distress, confined in a small area with noises and people using instruments to move them around. People have to be trained to take care of them in a better manner. And from what I've observed, Ohio is doing a pretty good job throughout the total picture of animal welfare. So it's not just a focus for us on any one animal. And if it's an animal that is to be consumed, we want to ensure that from birth to the end of production, that animal is cared for and treated well.
Chuck?
Well, in our operation, you'll come into a receiving area for people, a lobby, let's say, and you sign in, and on that sheet, the primary caregiver signs in every day. I was here, writes his name down, what time he got there, and what was his or her activities while they're there. And you look down through that sheet, and it says feed, water, health, and air. These are the kind of the classic things of animal welfare or animal well-being. Your job is in that order. Does every animal have feed? Does every animal have water? Does every animal have good health? And your job is to put an eyeball on every animal multiple times a day. And is the air quality proper? I mean, you shouldn't walk into a facility and be offended by what you smell, what you see, or what you hear. So that's where it starts. That's where welfare starts. It's that very basic. If you have a family pet, you get up in the morning, it's feed the dog, feed the cat, water the dog and the cat. How are they behaving today? Where are they? Are they healthy? Obviously, they're breathing the same air you are, so you're concerned about that. I mean, that's the basics of animal welfare. And then you move on, you build on from that with good training to employees and yourself of what's my attitude towards these animals? What do I do when I want to move them? What tools are available to me? What structures are available? So it's a building process. And I think society you see, and Harry's kind of reflecting that, society's stepping up the blocks that need to be in place.
Katie, would we be surprised if we came into your class with vet students on animal well-being, behavior? Would we be surprised at how your students define animal welfare?
I was actually surprised because I had them define animal welfare the first time I taught it, but I was pleasantly surprised by how they were thinking about it as more than just health. So I had my own perspective that, all these vet students are just going to be thinking about animal welfare in this one way, and I have to really try to get them to think outside the box. But many of them already came in with, they all have their own values, just like I have my values. Everybody here has their own values about what animal welfare means. And so they shared those in a class of 162, which was fantastic. But it was quite a diverse and very thoughtful definition of animal welfare.
If we look at companion animals or pets, we look at dairy animals providing milk, we look at Chuck and pigs that provide meat. We're talking about three completely different things. Are we applying the same standards to all three? Katie?
I get to answer that one first. I guess the question isn't something that I can answer, or that Harry can answer, or that Chuck can answer to say whether we should or not. But the question, I think, is more of a society question. Is, of course, our relationships with animals are very different. People's relationships with their pets are very different from their relationships with the food that they eat. So the standards for them are likely different because it reflects that relationship. And I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, well, I'll pick it up there.
Okay.
As we think about it and we talk about the human-animal bond, I think we're looking at that in a little bit too narrow. I think it should be the plural, human-animal bonds. There's not just one bond between me and animals. There are multiple. I can think of three, and there may very well be more. I think of three. One is our emotional bond. I mean, I feel that most strongly with my pets. I have 2 dogs. We could talk about that later. But there's an emotional bond there. I mean, I get up every morning, I do what they tell me to do, that sort of thing. There's a spiritual bond. All of us, as you're alluding to, come to these things from a spiritual perspective that's uniquely our own. So there's a spiritual bond there, and then there's an economic bond. So as you move through those different things, you know, the production animal on my farm is primarily an economic bond, and I would argue that those animals, because of that economic bond, are there's a great motivation that they're well taken care of. Because like I said, you know, none of my animals are ending up at SPCA. They're all taken care of for a purpose. They have a meaning and a purpose in life. You know, the dogs and cats ending up at SPCA are ending up there because of a breakdown in one of these bonds somewhere. So there may well be others, but that's how I kind of pick up where Katie was at.
I could add to that too, and I think for all animals, they're protected against cruelty, and that's something that Harry can speak to much better than I can, but this is, at least that standard is true of farm animals and pets. But care beyond cruelty, I think that it really depends on the relationship between ourselves and the animals.
And I think society sets that standard. When you look at our role, one of my daughters is a vegetarian, the other is leaning towards being a vegetarian. And there are about 7 million vegetarians, and about 22 million people lean towards that in the United States today. That's about 10% of the population. So you look at the other 90% looking for Chuck to produce good quality pork, and then you come back to the welfare of that particular animal. I know that that animal is not going to meet a good end, but it will meet a respectful end if it's handled from birth to slaughter in a proper manner. And that's the way enforcement has to look at any body that holds animals for any length of time.
Harry, do states have laws that protect companion animals?
Absolutely. Ohio's was revised, and it's a good question. There was a law passed in 1895 that was on the books almost verbatim until 2003.
1895?
Yes, sir.
To 2000?
That is 2003. And it took 9 years to change that statute. But the 95913 section now is mainly used for livestock. The 959131 specifies companion animals. So yes, and we work closely with the police and sheriff's departments, and also now the Department of Agriculture, that the standards are in place, and also rules for commercial dog breeding and also for exotic animals.
All right, and I just want to make it understood, I was not around when that original piece of legislation was passed.
I was close.
So how is it working with law enforcement? Do they understand the issue when you call them?
Oh, I think perfectly. We had the police, Cincinnati Police Division, do a raid on a house. They were looking for heroin. They opened a door on a shed and go, wow, there's a lot of dogs in here. They call us immediately. So we work together not only to remove those animals, but also through the judicial procedure to make that, ensure that individual is convicted not only of the heroin situation, but also the animal cruelty situation.
Well, California Proposition 2 is going to be taking effect January 1, 2015. That was pretty controversial in California. Nationwide, it got a lot of attention. Ohio decided to take a different approach. Harry, you've served on the Livestock Care Standards Board. How would you describe the process that Ohio went through to end up where we're at today?
Well, I believe it was a very sound process. People from diverse roles throughout the state were placed on the board to begin with. Then that board went out all over Ohio. I think I put 4,000 miles on my car going from point to point, Grange halls, community meetings, where people got to express what they felt about standards being set for whatever species it was. The board took all this into consideration, And I guess science and compassion were blended together to form standards to protect animals that were held on farms.
Chuck, as a livestock producer, how did you view the process and what we ended up with?
Well, I think the process, as Harry says, was very good. I'm glad to be sitting in Ohio and have experienced Ohio's process rather than California's. Having said that, and in the positions I sit, I know some of the backdoor information, and you can get bent out of shape about things. But the public, I think, needs to feel like, needs to be reassured that the result of all that was something very good, and that's the standards board that's looking over and moderating some of these many issues. California, I don't know the details there well, but I think they're going to run into some real problems because they've created enormous risk for their producers. Egg producers haven't got a clue of how they can fit into the constitutional amendment of California. And so how do they go and invest money? What do? They haven't got a clue. And so there's all sorts of mechanizations going on around that. In Ohio, we can turn to the Ohio Livestock Care Standards Board, and we may like it or dislike it. This is what it is. So that uncertainty's off the table. Manage towards it.
And some of the things that we're charged with, for example, keeping food safe plus keeping food economical, but at the same time protecting animals, is a very delicate blend, and a very spirited discussion took place with respect to all of that.
With the Livestock Care Standards Board direction, has that been added to curriculum at Ohio State University's vet school?
It hasn't yet, but it may be. I think it would be good for them to at least know that it exists. In one of my classes, I do teach about different animal welfare assurance programs and how different people have come out the problem a different way. I'm a Californian, but I live in Ohio, so I have to be diplomatic about the two ways those states have handled it.
I hope I stepped around that all right.
But what I can say is what I like about the Ohio approach is that it allows for a bit more flexibility, as well as in the definition of animal welfare, which is an evolving topic. Society changes its views. We're not thinking about animals the same way we thought about them 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So, and that's going to continue to happen. And the livestock standards board allows for that evolution to take place, whereas in some places, when it's made into law, then it's a little less flexible.
I think the dean of the School of Agriculture at OSU sits on the board. Mm-hmm. So I think that is a good pairing of university and the Department of Agriculture.
Here, let me ask you, 5 years ago, would we been sitting having this discussion?
Well, we could have, but we didn't. And I think that's an important point, that throughout Ohio, I think animal welfare and those who are producers and those who do teach have gotten together and shared more information. I think it was a blessing for Ohio to go through that process.
Yeah, you know, Katie sits in a very unique position, having been a city girl converted to a country girl, as she says. The typical consumer is, I think, statistically 2 generations removed from the farm. That's what the agricultural speakers always say, was that the typical consumer doesn't understand you, they're 2 generations removed from the farm. Well, they're 90%, 98% of the population. I'm 2% of the population. It's incumbent on me. I'm 2 generations removed from wherever the consumer is. It's incumbent on me to understand the other 98%. Mm-hmm. And so I think what Harry's alluding to is this conversation's beginning to be had. Yeah. Even sitting here today, that's what this conversation's about, is how do you bridge that gap? There's reasons society is where it is. People go to big cities for the benefits that are there. We've talked about that. Then they lose perspective on what the farm is. They remember what it was, and it's not what it used to be because of all sorts of, so having this conversation is important. Because everybody picks up food, sticks it in their mouth, has a fundamental reason to be interested in where it came from, what happened to it, and to know that it was done properly. And it's important to have this conversation and maintain that trust.
So what needs to happen next? big picture?
Well, from my perspective, information needs to continually go out, not only from Ohio State or from the various producers associations, but also from the Department of Agriculture website being active. These rules are reviewed on a quarterly basis. The board has to meet, and we look at things. Maybe that's not working as it should be, so what means should we utilize to change that? We listen to the producer, we listen to the scientist and say what's best for these animals in these situations, and have to take action to make change where change is necessary.
I would completely agree. I am a complete optimist, so in my view, I think that the more we talk about this, the more engagement we can have between the different stakeholders. Just like Chuck said, everybody is brought around food 3 or 4 or 5 times a day. It's something we all care about. So the more we can have these conversations, utilize social media, utilize things like the Ohio Livestock Care Standards Board, the more this, hopefully, conversation will become much more respectful than it has been in the past.
So do you think, since the Livestock Care Standards Board has come about, the discussions that led up to it, that attitudes between groups have changed in any way?
I think they're much improved. I think understanding the various roles that each organization or the producer or the university or the humane societies play is better understood. If someone from a humane society visited a farm in the past, they may have not been very welcome. And I think what we've managed to do over the past several years is acquaint people that were all in this for protecting the animals, and there are various ways to go about it. The producer has his way, the university trains people one way, and we have state statutes that we have to enforce. We're charged with that responsibility. What the standards did was even the playing field for discussion, and I think that was the best thing that came out of it.
How dicey did some of the early discussions get?
Well, they were very, very interesting, I'll say that. People, you don't know your adversary, so to speak, unless you engaged in some spirited conversation. And I think much of that led to a better understanding of the position that I, as someone from animal welfare and from enforcement, have to take. And I understand the producer's position much better. That's a personal feeling that I have, and I'm sure that that's spread throughout the industry.
Chuck, have you noticed a change?
Oh yeah, I agree with what Harry's saying. I think there's a lot more communication going on, and there's a lot more understanding of various people's roles, certainly in my life. I mean, my understanding of the consumer and some of their thinking, and it's driven a lot by my activity on social media, has greatly changed. And people 5 years ago that I was just adamantly have disagreed with, and now I may disagree with them, but I'm starting to understand where they're coming from. I'm starting to understand some more of their background and the societal things that cause them to ask the questions they're asking. And now I understand the value of asking that question. So answering it's perfectly fine. And at the same time, I think people, the consumer, starts to understand that the agricultural community is quite different. A rural community is quite different. I am a farmer because I like being alone. I mean, you're not going to have lots of people. You like being alone. So when somebody from the SPCA drives up in their shiny white van that's nicely waxed with a big badge on the side, someone like that drives up in our community, well, that's a red flag. And all sorts of defenses go up. So by having some of these understandings now, I think some of those defensive reactions are muted a lot more than they used to be. And I, you know, 5 years in isn't a very long time frame when you're talking about societal and attitudinal changes. But just keep in mind that the rural community, the farmer, male, female, man and woman, it's a different society. You do that because you like being alone and you like having individual responsibility, and that means you're not real fond of people looking over your shoulder. And we as a community of people are starting to open that door and express ourselves more.
Well, that's our show for today. Thanks to our panelists, and thanks to you for watching.
This program is made possible thanks to the generous support from the Ohio Farm Bureau members, producing our food, growing our economy, and making communities stronger. The Ohio Farm Bureau, forging a partnership between farmers and consumers. And by
Nationwide's family of companies has a variety of products to protect your family, with our promise to be there when you need us, from city to farm. Nationwide is on your side.
Funding for Our Ohio is also made possible by the generous support from Turner Farm, a working organic farm and education center in Indian Hill, Ohio, and by your membership support to this public television station. Thank you.